can be easy to overlook the reality that Jesus forever turned the world upside down with the help of just 12 ordinary guys. Of course, Jesus was God in the flesh, and he needed the help of none. However, Jesus did invite those 12 somewhat faithful, imperfect bunch to help catapult the message of salvation throughout the world and back. In Mark chapter 3 and Luke 6, we see Jesus taking some time alone up on a mountain to pray. The scriptures record Jesus spending not just the evening in prayer, but all throughout the night, petitioning God, having conversation with God until the sun rose. Although the scriptures don't exactly say what Jesus conversed with the Father about, we do read that immediately after this night, Jesus called the 12th with which he would change the world. So, who were these 12? We've all seen artists' renderings of the disciples, broad-chested, gray-haired men in their 50s, full of wisdom and life experience, right? Did they each possess some inherent supernatural gifting that God revealed to Jesus in that long night of prayer? Were they chosen because of their family heritage, because of their noble upbringing or birth? I don't think so. I believe the scriptures show that the 12 on which Jesus built the church were not as special, not as talented, and not as worldly qualified as you might think. I think they were a whole lot more like you and me, chosen not for what they were, but for what God might do through them, the unqualified yet willing rabble of the world. I believe that God changed the world with the modern equivalent of teenage dropouts. Let's look at a few scriptures that will help shed light on this. So in Exodus 30, Jewish law states that every male over the age of 20 was to pay a half shekel of silver as a tax when they visited the temple of God. In Matthew 17, we find the Pharisees testing Jesus to see if he and his disciples will pay. When Peter realizes that they don't have money to pay, he looks to Jesus for an answer. Jesus tells Peter to go fishing, saying, however, not to give them offense, go to the sea, cast a hook, and take the first fish that comes up. And when you open its mouth, you'll find a shekel. Take that and give it to them for me and for yourself. Well, where was the tax needed for the rest of the disciples? I think this suggests that Peter was the only disciple over the age of 20, the rest being under the age and therefore not needing to pay. In Matthew's gospel, Jesus is with his disciples in the midst of a crowd when he says, and whoever gives one of these little ones even a cup of cold water because he is my disciple, truly, I say to you, he will by no means lose his reward. Well, why would Jesus call his disciples little ones? This word is on par with little kids or children, not the kind of language you'd expect for gray-haired men with careers, right? Unless they were adolescents, probably between the ages of 13, 14, maybe as old as 17 or 18. Some historians note that the common age for marriage at this time in history was 18 for men and 14 for women. If a man wasn't betrothed to a wife by the age of 18, it could be seen as culturally abnormal. So why aren't all of the other disciples married outside of Peter? I believe it's possible that they were all under the common age of marriage. Lastly, in the time that Jesus walked the earth, a young person's best shot at wealth, influence, and success was to be in religious leadership. Some of the most powerful and successful people of that day were religious leaders and rabbis. Therefore, one of the highest hopes of a family was to see their son excel in religious training, and someday even become a rabbi himself. Now, since religious education was seen as the pathway to this success, schooling was geared that way. Schooling was rigorous and tough, and many young men failed or dropped out before their chance to succeed. So in this paradigm, primary school was first. Boys would spend ages 5 through 12 learning and memorizing the first 5 books of the Bible. This is how they learned to read, learn the alphabet, they learned about nature. They had to study hard in order to pass on to secondary schooling. Secondary schooling began at age 12 and continued to 15. If a young man had studied hard, learned the scriptures well, he would be invited to continue his education. He would then be studying the rest of the Old Testament. Now, at the same time, these students were simultaneously making a contingency plan for a future career, just in case they didn't make the cut. These young men would be learning a trade of their family, such as fishing or tax collection. If they didn't graduate on to the final level of schooling, if they weren't the best and the brightest, they had to have a fallback plan, and it usually was in the career and the field of their family heritage. Now, the last step was the real test. Those who had proven themselves so far would seek to follow out a rabbi and ask to follow him. After a time of rigorous questioning by the rabbi, much like an entrance exam for a college, the rabbi would give one of two answers. You have done well, son, but go and love God and continue in the trade of your family. You're not fit for following a rabbi. In other words, you got sent home packing. Or the rabbi would say the words they longed to hear. Follow me. I believe in you and your ability to be like me. So where do we find Jesus' disciples when they were called? They were beginning training in their family trades. Andrew, Peter, James, and John, they were working their trades with their fathers. This means that they weren't the most affluent. They weren't the best. They weren't the brightest. No, they were the ones that the world said probably didn't cut it. They had possibly been rejected by those whom they most admired and were told they didn't have what it takes to make it. So what can we learn from this? Well, namely that Jesus turned the world upside down with 12 ordinary young men, 12 college dropouts. Jesus spent that long night in prayer to choose these 12 to change the face of the world. God doesn't call the equipped. He equips the called. And you and me are in that group of the called. No matter your background, your heritage, your socioeconomic status, you can make a difference. God is in the business of taking the seemingly ordinary and doing the extraordinary. So toss aside any excuse the world has offered. You're not smart enough, you're not talented enough, you're not wealthy enough, not experienced enough, and understand that just like the 12 that Jesus chose, you have a call to be discipled and make disciples. You have been chosen to make your mark on the world. Paul said it like this, "For considering your calling, brothers, not many of you were wise according to the world, not many powerful, not many of noble birth, but God chose what is weak in the world to bring to shame the strong, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God." Jesus changed the world forever with 12 ordinary, everyday guys. What might he do with you?